I've had a wonderful life. I'm still having a wonderful life. And what I was doing was my passion. And I worked hard, but I enjoyed what I was doing. And I want to just keep working as long as I can. So anyway, I rode a horse as far back as I can remember. My daddy had an old mare that we ran between the yard fence and the barn. And I'd go out there before I ever started to school, and I was so little, and she had her head down to eat, I'd just lay across her neck, and when she'd raise her head up, I'd slide back on her head, and I could ride her around with my feet and ride her all over the place. And then I started helping my daddy. When I was about 6 years old, I kind of pouted because my brother got to go when he was 3 years old, and I had to wait till I was about 6. But at that time, we were going to the railroad with our cattle. We shipped out a bazaar in Matfield. And for some reason, I never could figure out, but our farthest south pasture always went to bazaar. And it was about a 28 to 30 mile ride. And my mama would go out in the morning and kill 2 or 3 chickens and fry chicken, go home and bake bread and pies, pack up all the dishes and utensils and everything and bring them out to meet us, because it'd be the middle of the afternoon before we'd get into bazaar with the cattle. So she'd meet us out in the pasture, usually at the end of the lane. And I would get, since I was the little one, I'd get to herd the cattle while all the cowboys ate their lunch. They'd go eat, and of course the cattle they were tired and they were thirsty, trying to go to water. And so it was a pretty good job for a 6-year-old, but I'd try to hold them in the corner there while the cowboys were eating, and then when they'd get done eating, then I would go grab a bite and then catch up with the bunch before they got to the river where we had to cross the river. And I remember when I was pretty little yet, I was helping. We had an old rickety metal bridge there at Bazaar that we had to take the cattle across. And when we started across, if you didn't really get after the head end, they'd turn around and come back. And my daddy said, come with me, and we started to push a little bunch ahead of us. And at that time, Shorty Nurnberg was still out there. And he had a bad habit. He'd take his hat off and start waving it because the cattle were running up behind him. And he'd start waving his hat. And I looked at my daddy, and he goes, just try to run them over him. because I thought, okay, if you say so, But if they turned around and come back, then they'd turn the whole bunch around. And then when we'd get on the other side, then we could slow them down. But I just remember doing that. And then we'd get on into the stockyards. We'd always weigh the cattle and then pin them. And then Daddy would go to the depot and get the billing on the cattle, see when the train was coming and everything. And if the train was going to be late, where it's going to be after dark, back then we didn't have trucks and pickups and trailers. So we had to ride to the pasture, and then after we shipped, we had to ride home. Well, if it was going to be after dark, we used to work with the Pinkstons, and they lived closer, so they would stay their horseback, and Daddy would send me home with his horse, my brother-in-law's horse, and my brother's horse. So here I am, 6 years old, leading 3 horses, and I wasn't big enough to open the gates, so he put cheaters on the gates so I could get the gates open. And I would ride home and back the 20-some miles home and leading 3 horses. But when I'd get to the pasture, get at the end of the cattle lane, I could take the bridle off of my dad's horse, and he would just trot to the next gate. And then he'd just graze around there till I got there, and open the gate, and he'd gone through. But I don't remember ever doing that from Matfield. I think it was short enough we could all ride back home after